The series begins in Medellin, Colombia, in 1978. At that time, there's a woman named Griselda who seems scared as she hurries into a house. She's hurt on her left side and takes medicine for her wound. The movie says she was once the scariest person for the famous drug lord, Pablo Escobar. The next day, Griselda calls her friend Carmen in Miami to ask if she can stay at her place for a while because she's having problems with her husband, Alberto. With her 3 sons, Griselda rushes to the airport to leave. The next day, they arrive in Miami. They take a taxi to Carmen's house and move in right away. Soon, they reach Carmen's house, which was simple and very different from their home in Medellin. After settling their kids into their rooms, the 2 friends went to a bar. There, Griselda told Carmen that she had just left Alberto because he treated her badly. Turns out, Carmen had a similar experience with her husband, Ronaldo, who used to be a drug dealer. There, Griselda said she wanted to quit the drug business now. She came to Miami to follow Carmen's example, as Carmen had started her own business. Carmen, now out of the drug trade, offered Griselda a job at her travel agency. Even though she claimed she had stopped, Griselda still hid cocaine in her son's bag. The next day, Griselda worked in Carmen's quiet office. When she got the chance, she called her contact at the cocaine factory in Medellin, named Arturo. Griselda told him she was in Miami and wanted to start a new business there. She also asked where people from Medellin usually made deals in Miami. Despite Arturo warning her that the old dealer was dead, killed by a local gang, Griselda didn't seem to care. After getting some information, Griselda took a break at a coffee shop and found out that the waitress, Chuco, was also Colombian. Chuco was one of the immigrants trying to find work in Miami because it's a place where many people from Latin America come hoping for a better life, even if they're there illegally. Later that evening, Griselda went to the place Arturo had told her about, a nightclub where lots of Latinas hung out. She approached someone who seemed like the owner, a guy named Johnny. There, Griselda showed him her goods, and after tasting them, Johnny admitted they were delicious and better than what he usually got. Griselda then offered Johnny a discount on a kilogram of cocaine. When Johnny heard the large quantity, he invited Griselda to meet his boss, Almacar, a gangster from Venezuela. However, Almacar has strict rules, so not everyone can meet him easily. Johnny suggested letting Almacar taste Griselda's goods, but he refused outright. Determined, Griselda insisted on meeting Almacar herself. She told him she had a kilogram of goods from Medellin. But even when Almacar heard about the kilo, he still said no because it wasn't enough for him. Griselda was turned away and kicked out. Meanwhile, Johnny, curious about the goods, actually stole a kilo from Griselda. This made Griselda cry because she was counting on selling the goods to start her new life. When she got home, Griselda was scared about what the future held for her 3 sons. She also remembered the past, just before she decided to leave Medellin. Back then, her husband, Alberto, took her to Fernando's house, his older brother and boss. Alberto was in trouble because the police had seized his goods on the way to New York City. Meanwhile, Fernando didn't want to deal with the problem and kept demanding his payment. But Alberto couldn't afford it. So Fernando suggested a disturbing solution that he wanted to spend a night with Griselda in exchange for forgiving Alberto's debt. Alberto also wanted Griselda to pay off his debt with her body, even though she used to be a prostitute and felt ashamed that her husband wouldn't stand up for her. Reluctantly, Griselda agreed to Alberto's demands and went along with it to satisfy Fernando. But afterwards, Alberto got jealous and they ended up fighting. Griselda had had enough and threatened to leave. But Alberto kept insulting her, pushing her to her breaking point. In a fit of emotion, Griselda shot both her husband and his bodyguard. She was wounded in the exchange, though she had blocked some of the shots with a bandage earlier. Back in the present, Griselda waits at the spot where Johnny usually buys drugs. When he arrives, she follows him inside. Johnny meets someone named Eddie and gives him samples of Griselda's goods. Then Johnny goes outside to get Griselda's things from his car. Seizing the opportunity, Griselda hits him with a baseball bat and takes back her stuff, demanding that Johnny not arrange any more sales for her. But Johnny showed up at Carmen's office instead and shouted that he had set up a drug deal for Griselda. At that time, Carmen overheard, and Griselda tried to explain it was a one-time thing to get money for a house in Miami. But Carmen didn't want anything to do with drugs and asked Griselda to leave her house. Long story short, Before Griselda went to meet Eddie for the deal, she hired Chuco as a bodyguard. Chuco agreed because the pay was good. Soon after, they rented a car and went to the cafe where Johnny was waiting at the door. Afterward, they went to a special room and met Eddie. There, they negotiated the price and settled on $20,000. The transaction went smoothly, and Eddie gave him the cash. Suddenly, Almacar's men burst in, breaking the door, and started attacking everyone because Almacar didn't allow deals without his permission. Griselda was about to be attacked when Chuco intervened and managed to shoot one of the attackers, although he got injured in the process. Meanwhile, Griselda, covered in blood, quickly left with $20,000. She went straight to Almacar's headquarters and asked him to try her goods. In that moment, Almacar reluctantly agreed and got drunk after tasting them. He showed interest and asked about availability. Unaware of Griselda's past as a dealer, Almacar was willing to give her a chance to become a permanent supplier. Back in Medellin, Fernando sought revenge for his brother's death at Griselda's hands. He sent his man, Dario, to find her, but the house was empty. Fernando then instructed Dario to check Griselda's old workplace, a brothel in Medellin. Meanwhile, Griselda waited at the Miami airport for her former colleagues, a group of prostitutes she called to work for her. They were brought by Arturo, the factory accountant. They arrived at Griselda's new base, a rundown motel with an empty pool. Griselda instructed the prostitutes to remove their bras, which were used to smuggle drug packages. Using this method, Griselda tries to become a supplier for Almacar. She also praised Arturo for his bravery in joining her operation. They feel optimistic about their future. However, Arturo warned Griselda about the danger from Fernando. He mentioned that his brother-in-law had sent Dario to find Griselda. Griselda's spirits sank when she heard that someone was after her. Meanwhile, Dario tried to track Griselda down at the brothel where she used to work. The owner of the brothel said he hadn't heard from her, but he mentioned that many prostitutes had suddenly left. Dario questioned a prostitute who didn't seem to like Griselda and learned that the group of prostitutes who had left had gone to Miami at Griselda's request. At that time, Griselda has gathered a suitcase of smuggled cocaine and is getting ready to take it to Almacar. However, Carmen shows up, causing Griselda to delay her departure. Carmen just discovered that a large number of ticket orders at her office yesterday were actually from Griselda to send prostitutes. Griselda wanted to help Carmen because she noticed the lack of orders in Carmen's office. But Carmen stressed that she didn't want any involvement with drugs and forbid Griselda from placing any more ticket orders. Soon after, accompanied by Arturo, Griselda went to meet Almacar at his headquarters. But when they arrived, they saw another man glaring at Griselda. There, Almacar introduced him as Papo, his supplier. Surprisingly, Almacar decided not to buy Griselda's goods because he didn't want to upset Papo. Griselda was furious because she had brought in prostitutes but felt cheated instead. At that time, Almacar also demanded that he would only accept Griselda's goods if the price was discounted by 90%. Realizing they were being tricked, Arturo quickly pulled Griselda away. But they were stopped by Riviera, Almacar's assistant, and told to listen to Almacar. Surprisingly, Almacar threatened to blacklist Griselda with all the dealers in Miami so they wouldn't buy her goods. He suggested Griselda change professions to make money. The next day, Griselda felt embarrassed and worried about facing the prostitute she had promised big money to. Despite having a suitcase full of goods, she didn't know where to sell them. Isa, one of the senior prostitutes, comforted Griselda, assuring her that they would still support her. As long as they had food and were safe, they wouldn't ask for anything more. Afterward, Isa invited Griselda to go out and relax. They went to an upscale bar with the goods they had. They tried to enjoy themselves, but noticed that the other patrons seemed stiff. They decided to liven things up with drugs since they had plenty in stock. Suddenly, everyone who had been acting proper went wild. Griselda got an idea from this. At that time, she went back to the motel and told Arturo. Instead of giving up, Griselda wanted to order more cocaine from Panissa, the manufacturer. She even suggested bringing Panissa to Miami. Griselda believed she had an irresistible plan that Panissa couldn't refuse. The next day, Griselda gathers the prostitutes and shares her brilliant plan. She explains that there's an untapped market of busy rich people whose lives have become boring. Griselda's idea is to have the prostitutes go to places where rich people hang out and give out drugs for free, not to sell them, but to get the rich addicted. Once addicted, they'll come back on their own. The plan is put into action as the prostitutes visit luxury spots in Miami like golf courses, sports clubs, and aerobics places. However, Papo catches wind of their activities and reports it to Almacar. He warns that Griselda's presence could threaten their gang's income. Although Almacar tries to act like it's not a big deal, he doesn't stop Papo from taking action against Griselda. In the end, Griselda succeeded in convincing Panisa to come to Miami. She took him to a bar and showed him her stock of goods. Griselda explained how even rich-looking people need things to relieve stress and pointed out the market they could fill. However, Panisa wasn't fully convinced of Griselda's idea. When she asked for a delivery of 10 kilos for their first sale, Panisa laughed it off. He said he wasn't like Ochoa, the big supplier in Medellin. Griselda knew she needed to prove herself, so she asked Panisa to stay overnight because she had something to show him. The next day, Fernando and Dario arrived at the Miami airport to hunt for Griselda. In the evening, Griselda showed Panisa what she wanted to show him. She and her team held a private party at a yacht and invited potential buyers to join in the fun. The party was buzzing with excitement as the prostitutes sold Griselda's goods. Panisa started to feel tempted, especially when he saw that Griselda had the prostitutes ready to distribute the goods. Griselda also explained that aerobics instructors, tennis coaches, and personal drivers for rich people were already lined up to become dealers. Suddenly, there were reports of trouble outside. Papo and his men tried to break up the event. Soon after, Chuco stepped in to stop them, but Papo fired a warning shot, making the atmosphere tense. But then, Griselda intervened, trying to calm Papo down. Suddenly, Papo pointed a gun at her and threatened to shoot. Griselda challenged Papo to kill her in front of the lawyers at the party. Shortly after, Panisa stepped in and aimed a gun at Papo, introducing himself as Griselda's partner. Seeing the fierce look in Panisa's eyes, Papo backed off and left, causing screams from the guests. The party went on, and Panisa started to believe in Griselda. If her presence was so threatening to their rivals, it meant they were on the right track. They agreed to become partners. Griselda and her friends ended the evening with a bang. She also bid farewell to ISA and her team, who were returning to Colombia. They promised to return in 2 weeks with another shipment of drugs. Griselda then called Carmen, feeling guilty for lying to her. She offered to pay for her mistake by buying some Miami-Colombia tickets from Carmen's travel agency. At that time, Griselda insisted it would be a waste to give the money to another agency. Finally, Carmen agreed and accepted Griselda's offer. That morning, Griselda happily walked towards the door of her motel room, but she was surprised to find Fernando already there with Dario. At first, everything seemed normal because Griselda's children were nearby. But things got tense when Fernando insisted on knowing why Griselda had left home. Fernando's questions made Griselda's 3 children fearful and suspicious. He revealed that Griselda had killed their stepfather, Alberto, and threatened revenge. Griselda's eldest son, Ubero, tried to intervene, but Dario stopped him. Then, Griselda suggested they move to the next room so her sons wouldn't witness the confrontation. However, her voice could still be heard, and it frightened her sons. Suddenly, Ubero grabbed a gun from his mother's room and aimed it at Fernando, but Dario intervened and aimed a gun at Ubero. On the other hand, Fernando, who was about to kill Griselda, then ordered Dario to kill her son. Shortly after, Dario prepared to shoot, but it was Fernando who fired the shot. Griselda was surprised and relieved, then immediately hugged Ubero. Meanwhile, Dario left the room, and Griselda approached him, asking why he didn't shoot. Dario confessed that he couldn't bring himself to harm an innocent child and now didn't know where to go. Then, Griselda asked him to take care of Fernando's body and said they would talk later. 3 months later, at a sports club, a tennis coach is brutally attacked by one of Papo's men. Meanwhile, Griselda enjoys the success of her work and takes care of those around her. Soon after, the tennis coach arrived to report to Griselda. Upon hearing this, Griselda assigned Dario to temporarily act as her bodyguard. Now Dario, once an adversary, has become Griselda's subordinate. Shortly after, Arturo brought news that Ochoa, the main supplier from Medellin, wanted to buy all of Griselda's business assets in Miami. They sent their agent, Rafael, and invited Panisa to a meeting. There, Arturo suggested it might be time for them to retire and avoid the troubles of gang life. Griselda found this prospect intriguing. Meanwhile, police are investigating gang-related activities in Miami, and Almacar has become a target. On the other hand, the police have questioned a witness who saw Griselda at the incident at Eddie's Cafe. Some time later, there was another murder on the street. The police were questioning a witness, a Latina, who told them everything she saw and mentioned a nickname, El Loco. On the other hand, June, a police analyst who is also Latina, discovered that El Loco is the nickname of Almacar, who is now a suspect in the murder. Meanwhile, Griselda shared the news from Arturo with Dario, who now also serves as her romantic partner. At that time, Griselda hadn't made a decision yet, so she confided in ISA. ISA explained that in Medellin, Griselda's name was becoming well-known among drug dealers, and Ochoa was just one of them. They all call Griselda the godmother. This made Griselda feel proud and powerful as the queen of the drug world. The next day, they arrived at an island in the Bahamas to meet Rafael, a representative of Ochoa. On the other hand, Ochoa, a major supplier, bought the island from the American government to use it as a distribution center. With a large amount of goods, Ochoa aims to control the Miami market with prices they set themselves. They have their own planes and planned smuggling methods. From the island, their drug packages will be dropped into the ocean, then retrieved by someone on duty on the beach. Afterward, the drugs will be taken and sold in New York City. Griselda was stunned by the sophistication of their operations, unlike her own reliance on traditional methods. Panisa suggested that Griselda should accept Ochoa's offer. Later, they gathered in the house, where Rafael mentioned that Ochoa truly appreciated Griselda's work. As a result, Ochoa offered Griselda a box of cash, totaling $15 million. This intrigued Panisa, but Griselda surprisingly rejected the offer. Rafael and Panisa were shocked and warned that this meant Griselda would still face Ochoa's side. When Panisa returned home, he was furious with Griselda's decision and called her ignorant about benefits. But Griselda stood her ground, offering Panisa a 26% share of all income if he joined her plan. Griselda's decision wasn't just about ambition, cause she genuinely cared about everyone around her. If she took Ochoa's payment, Carmen would lose many plane ticket orders and her prostitute friends would lose assignments. To counter Ochoa, Griselda contacted all the dealers in Miami to discuss his proposal. During the meeting, Griselda revealed Ochoa's plan to kick them out of Miami. She urged the dealers to unite against Ochoa and refuse to be bought by him. The dealers were excited to hear Griselda's passionate invitation, but Papo stirred them up by suggesting it was just a trick to make them work for her. He didn't want a female boss and urged others not to trust Griselda. Papo's words started to sway the dealers, and they asked about Almacar's stance. And Riviera, representing Almacar, revealed that his boss intended to accept Ochoa's offer. Learning this, the dealers lost confidence in Griselda, knowing Almacar wouldn't support her. They backed out of her invitation. But there, Griselda, undeterred, chased after Riviera and requested to meet Almacar alone. Upon hearing that, Riviera agreed to take her as long as she came alone. On their way, Riviera confessed he was hesitant about Griselda's call for a meeting. He explained his boss was on the run, and Ochoa's offer was a chance to escape the authorities. Almacar already knew what Griselda would discuss, as someone had reported the meeting's outcome. Despite Griselda's wish to spend the night together, Almacar couldn't risk it. With a witness who could send him to jail, he urged her to leave. Unwilling to give up, Griselda returned and offered to eliminate the witness. Later that night, after satisfying Dario, she gave him the witness's address. But Dario struggled, unwilling to commit murder to help someone like Almacar. Still, Griselda insisted he and Chuco carry out the task together. Soon after, they arrived at the house and broke in, finding the man they sought. However, he was married with a baby. There, Dario informed Griselda that the mission was delayed due to the baby. He suggested hiding the family, but Griselda refused. The next day, authorities arrived at the witness's house to find 2 victims and a baby left alive. Meanwhile, Griselda met with Almacar. They agreed Almacar would be the public face while they made decisions together behind the scenes, as gangsters wouldn't accept a female leader. The meeting continued with Ochoa's representative, Rafael. Almacar welcomed him and proposed doing business in Miami through him, to which Rafael agreed, sealing it with a handshake. In the end, Almacar and Griselda have become the top drug bosses in Miami. The next day, Griselda shared advice with the prostitutes, telling them to dress up for the celebration party that night. That evening, everyone gathered at Almacar's disco club for the party. Meanwhile, the police made a breakthrough in their investigation. Instead of focusing on the witness's house incident, they found fingerprint evidence linking Almacar to a previous murder. At the same time, Almacar was walking with Riviera when they were surrounded by police. They fought back and fled in different directions. Almacar found himself being pursued by June, a determined police officer. In the evening, Griselda and her crew headed to the disco club for a party. But there, she noticed from afar that Almacar wasn't there. Panissa then approached to explain that Almacar had been caught, and Papo had taken over his turf. Turns out, Papo had also struck a deal with Rafael, leaving Griselda out. Panissa agreed to the deal because he didn't want to deal with Griselda's stubbornness. At that time, Panissa had bought off all the high-class dealers, and the other gangsters were on board with removing Griselda from Miami's drug scene. But there, Griselda insisted on talking to Rafael, but he had the same attitude as the others, preferring not to deal with her. To Rafael, Griselda was scarier than Panissa and Papo, whom he could control. Feeling betrayed by everyone, including Panissa, revenge stirred in Griselda's heart. As a godmother of Miami, she refused to give up and began plotting to reclaim her territory. Some time later, Griselda was still figuring out how to take back her business land and rise again. Then in 1980, news spread about people who had escaped from Cuba and arrived in Miami. Griselda decided to help some of them join a military group to fight against their enemies. Meanwhile, she also moved to a new house. At that time, her team members encouraged her not to give up, so Griselda decided to take action. On the other hand, Chico and Rodrigo, two of the Cuban refugees, joined Dario, who was already on his way to attack their enemies. At that time, Dario aimed at Panissa, while Chico targeted Papo's house. Long story short, Dario carried out a brutal attack during the day. He killed Panissa and his bodyguard at a liquor shop, while Rodrigo blew up Papo's house. Soon, this shocking news aired on TV as breaking news. Rafael, watching from the Bahamas, became furious. Riviera also saw the news somewhere. At the liquor shop, police found items left by Dario, including a pickup truck filled with heavy weapons. Griselda intentionally left a sign declaring war. And at night, Rafael flew to Miami to meet Griselda. Initially, she thought the messenger from Ochoa's gang wanted to negotiate, but Rafael came only to taunt her. He revealed that the body found in Papo's house was Papo's father, meaning Papo was still alive. This surprised Griselda and Dario. Rafael also warned them that Papo would retaliate, not at Griselda's heavily guarded house, but at her other assets. Then, after Rafael left, Griselda remembered that Rodrigo was at the old house with ISA. Soon after, Dario quickly rushed to the house, while Rodrigo was spending time with two prostitutes. At the same time, Papo's men arrived at the house. Afterward, Dario arrived and found a crowd of neighbors witnessing the horror. He saw Rodrigo, ISA, and another friend in the yard dead. At that moment, Griselda was shocked to hear the news. That evening, Griselda received a surprising call from Riviera, who had managed to escape and was hiding in California. He praised Griselda's actions against Almacar's traitors and expressed his desire to help her. Meanwhile, Miami police arrived at the scene. They found a tattoo on Rodrigo's body matching that of a victim from the liquor store, identifying him as a Marielito, a Cuban refugee. They realized that many refugees had joined criminal gangs in Miami. Feeling guilty about Rodrigo's death, Griselda vowed to Rodrigo's mother that she would avenge her son's death. At night, Griselda called Riviera to ask for information about Papo's headquarters. The following day, Griselda and Dario went to Papo's headquarters. It was Dario's first time participating in such violent actions, but Griselda was still nervous. Dario went in first while Griselda waited at the door, visible to people in nearby rooms. Once the situation was under control, Griselda was allowed inside. Unfortunately, Papo wasn't there. However, they found the killers who had murdered Isa and Rodrigo, left behind by Dario to frame Griselda. Despite her fear, Griselda managed to kill one of the men with a gunshot. It wasn't as deliberate or ruthless as she had hoped, but it marked her first act of violence. This experience would eventually make her more courageous in committing further acts of violence. When Griselda got home, she still felt sick and threw up. Meanwhile, the police arrived at the scene. June also received more information about a Latina woman involved in the murder. To prepare for the war against Papo, Griselda, with her cousin Rodrigo's help, gathered even more refugees from Cuba to form a strong force. At that time, Griselda inspired them to fight bravely, reminding them of the new life they had been given in Miami thanks to her help. They were willing to sacrifice everything for their right to live in the country. There, Griselda easily rallied the Marielitos, who felt indebted to her, and they were ready to do anything for their godmother. For the next attack, Griselda made sure Arturo hid in his new house. Her plan was to ambush a shipment of goods from Ochoa, along with the dealer and Papo's men. With the strength of the Cuban refugee fleet behind her, they were confident they could succeed in this operation. Long story short, they launched an attack on Ochoa's warehouse in the Bahamas, seizing the transport trucks and goods at sea. Then, they moved Ochoa's belongings to a new stronghold. With this success, Griselda became more excited, and the Cuban refugee soldiers felt more accepted. At that time, she was enjoying her role as Miami's drug lord more and more. Meanwhile, Rafael was becoming increasingly confused by these events. On the other hand, Papo struggled to attack Griselda because her base was heavily guarded by the Cuban refugee fleet. One night, while relaxing, Griselda suddenly felt sick and rushed to the toilet to vomit. Euberio was surprised and worried about his mother's condition, thinking she was too stressed from the cartel war. Then, Griselda confessed that she was pregnant but asked Euberio not to tell anyone, especially Dario. Meanwhile, the police remained curious about a mysterious woman often found at the scenes of gangster murders. Their investigations intensified. One night, Agent June, accompanied by Diaz, went to a nightclub to meet an informant named Morales. At that time, June wanted to gather information about the women involved in Miami's drug trade. Morales claimed he didn't know, but June sensed he was hiding something. Soon after, they set up a trap, and Morales eventually confessed that he often saw a woman who ran a drug cartel at Almacar's club. Her name was Griselda Blanco. In the Bahamas, Rafael grew increasingly puzzled by Griselda's attacks. He considered seeking help from Ochoa's fleet, but decided against it, fearing it would make him appear weak in front of Griselda. Soon after, Rafael finally contacted Griselda and surrendered. He asked for his cocaine back in exchange for letting Griselda control Miami. However, he had one condition: that Griselda had to allow Papo to return to Miami to bury his father and continue dealing drugs there. Griselda said she would consider Rafael's offer. Upon knowing that, Arturo and Dario advised her to consider it carefully, as it was rare for the Ochoa cartel to make peace. On the other hand, Dario, knowing about Griselda's pregnancy, urged her to reduce risky cartel activities. He believed they had enough and suggested accepting Rafael's terms. However, Dario's plea wasn't enough to calm Griselda's anger. She didn't trust Papo and still harbored resentment over Isa's death. There, Griselda also told that Riviera, who had always seen her as a strong woman capable of changing the drug scene in Miami, but refrained from giving an opinion. Riviera simply advised Griselda to listen to her heart. In the end, Griselda followed her conscience. She wanted Ochoa to surrender and beg for her forgiveness. Instead of returning Ochoa's cocaine, she chose to destroy it by burning it. Griselda also gave a special sword to Carlos, Rodrigo's cousin, entrusting him with an important mission. The next day at the airport, as Papo was about to board the plane, Carlos approached him with the sword. In a recent news report, a man from Colombia was violently attacked with a sword, resulting in his death. This same sword was originally sent by Griselda to Rafael in the Bahamas. Later on, Griselda called Rafael who was very angry at her cruel actions. Griselda made it clear that she didn't want to share her drug business with Papo. So, she challenged Ochoa to meet her first if they wanted to sell drugs in Miami. Meanwhile, Carlos, who beheaded Papo, was arrested by the police. June tried to convince him to cooperate with the authorities, but Carlos refused to speak. In the end, Griselda got what she wanted. Fabio and Ochoa came to Miami to meet her. That night, Griselda, accompanied by Dario and Arturo, was filled with hope as they planned to take control of the city. When Griselda entered the meeting room, she was accompanied only by Arturo. Fabio, representing the Ochoa family, greeted her warmly. He praised Griselda for her tactics in Miami, even though they sometimes involve cruelty. Surprisingly, Ochoa echoed similar sentiments. Before discussing business, Rafael killed Arturo to even the score. Then, Fabio laid out his terms, ignoring Griselda's shock at the violence. 3 years later, Griselda had become the drug queen of Miami, representing the Medellin cartel. With Riviera's expertise, the organization grew stronger. At that time, June and Diaz sought help from the American Congress because they couldn't stop Griselda's operations. There, June admitted that even the Miami police were compromised by the cartel. That evening, Rafael came to meet Griselda to introduce a dealer named John who worked in South Florida. Rafael said John had good connections in the area. But Griselda found John's attitude annoying and kicked him out, ignoring Rafael's recommendation that John was approved by Fabio. At that moment, Griselda was still angry with Rafael for killing Arturo. Meanwhile, her 2 children had joined her in the drug business, part of Griselda's plan for them to inherit her empire one day. Soon after, Riviera reported the arrival of 2 police agents before Congress, and Griselda gave instructions for action. One day, during a police meeting, a superior suddenly called Diaz out of the room. June followed and learned Diaz had been framed. The commander had checked rumors that Diaz had taken bribes from the drug cartel. According to Diaz, the commander discovered an unusual amount of money in Diaz's account that couldn't have come from his police salary. As a result, Diaz was asked to resign from his position, showing accountability to the public. It seemed Griselda had intentionally transferred the money through Riviera to undermine Diaz. Riviera also spread rumors to the media. Griselda was pleased with Riviera's clever tactics and moved on to her next plan. But there, Riviera suspected some of their police colleagues were working as informants. He mentioned a few names they should be cautious of. With Dario's birthday approaching, Griselda wanted everything sorted before the celebration. She didn't mind how many informants there were. She just wanted Riviera to eliminate them all. Long story short, while Griselda was busy pampering herself at the salon, Riviera was busy carrying out brutal attacks. They killed intelligence officers without mercy. Some were even mutilated. The police were furious, and June became increasingly frustrated with Griselda's actions. Still, they couldn't catch Griselda. June decided on a risky plan that they would attack one of Griselda's drug warehouses, even though it might mean losing track of the others as Griselda would likely move them. June hoped that this attack would provoke Griselda into making a mistake. When Dario's birthday arrived, guests came in luxury cars. Griselda introduced all her children, including the youngest, Michael. Alongside celebrating Dario's birthday, Griselda also wanted to flaunt the power of their cartel in Miami. On another note, Dario has retired from his violent past, so Griselda gives him a gold-plated weapon as a sentimental gift. She also gives each guest a gold necklace. They all enjoy the party, dancing, and having fun. Soon after, Riviera reports that the police have attacked one of their warehouses. Griselda is puzzled because they thought they had dealt with all potential threats. But there, Riviera promises to investigate further. At the same time, Dario tries to reassure Griselda, but the news leaves her unfocused and unable to fully enjoy the party. Meanwhile, June returns home from the attack and finds something suspicious at the warehouse. It was a contract signed by a woman named Carmen. Griselda tries to rejoin the party, but encounters Martha Ochoa, Fabio's cousin, and her boyfriend, Rafael. Shortly after, Griselda asked Martha about John's relationship with Fabio. Martha said they had met, but assured Griselda it wasn't a problem. Seeing Griselda looking worried, Martha suggested she'd try a new drug to relax. But the drug made her more anxious. Griselda then sought advice from Riviera about Rafael, Fabio, and John. Riviera suggested killing them, but Dario scolded him for always suggesting violence. They argued, and meanwhile, Griselda's son Dixon caused a scene by attacking a guest. Feeling dizzy, Griselda asked her assistant Estella to cut the cake. Afterward, Dario asked guests to continue partying and invited Griselda to talk. He expressed a desire for a peaceful life away from such chaos. He complained about Riviera's constant suggestions of violence and suggested they leave the drug world while they were still on top. But Griselda was furious. She didn't want to leave the drug world when she was at the height of her success. Then, in a fit of anger, she accused Dario of being a police informant, which made him very upset. There, Martha tried to cheer Griselda up by offering drugs. After smoking upstairs, they went downstairs and ran into Carmen, who was leaving. Carmen warned Griselda to cut down on drugs. Martha, who had given Griselda the drugs, felt offended by Carmen's advice. She also planted the idea in Griselda's head that Carmen might be a police spy. Griselda couldn't stop thinking about Martha's words. Long story short, Carmen arrived at her new home only to find June waiting for her. Realizing June was from the police, Carmen stayed quiet and tried to enter. But she was shocked when June showed her a rental document belonging to her company, found at a drug warehouse. It seemed Griselda had been using Carmen's company for money laundering. June offered Carmen a chance to provide information about Griselda, particularly about the murders she had committed. But Carmen refused and asked June to leave. Meanwhile, Dario, still upset, retreated to the attic where Estella tried to comfort him. They chatted, but Griselda, who was drunk, accused Estella of trying to steal her husband when she found out. But then, Estella decided to flee, with Griselda chasing her, wielding a gold weapon meant for Dario as a gift. Griselda tried to attack her assistant, but Estella escaped. Then, Dario came to calm Griselda, but her drunken state made her uncontrollable. Suddenly, an argument ensued, and Griselda shot at Dario's favorite car in frustration before he went inside, tired of the chaos. The commotion drew the guests together, prompting Griselda, who towered over them, to approach and hold John at gunpoint, demanding he undress and bark like a dog. She then forced the other guests into humiliating acts. Soon after, Carmen intervened, calming Griselda and dispersing the guests. She persuaded Griselda to leave Miami and start afresh elsewhere, as Carmen had saved enough money in another account. There, Carmen explained that she returned that night because the police had visited her earlier. This made Griselda anxious, and she accused Carmen of spying. Despite Carmen's attempts to explain, Griselda became even more suspicious and violently attacked her. Thankfully, Dario intervened and stopped the altercation. But then, Carmen fled, and Dario once again tried to calm Griselda, urging her to leave the chaos behind. Dario, who used to be tough, has softened since Michael's arrival, wanted to be a good father to him. Unfortunately, Griselda remains stubborn and distrustful, even towards her husband. She kicked Dario out of the house. Meanwhile, Dixon went from home to a disco and got into another fight, this time pulling a gun on someone. Dixon was chased by the police and sought refuge at Chuco's house, asking to hide there. However, Chuco, who had just become a father, refused to help and threw Dixon out. Soon after, Dixon left his car at Chuco's house and returned home, complaining to Griselda about Chuco's behavior. He asked Griselda to teach Chuco a lesson. Under the influence of drugs, Griselda decided to kill Chuco. She also suspected him of being a police spy because he hadn't attended the party that night. Shortly after, Griselda ordered Riviera to kill Chuco, but Riviera hesitated because Griselda was drunk. He tried to persuade her not to act rashly, but Griselda was determined to proceed that night. The next morning, Riviera wanted to prove his loyalty to Griselda, so he tried to attack Chuco with a warning shot. But he failed and reported back to Griselda, who was now sober and surprisingly grateful. She got up and went to the TV room, where her children were watching a news report about a boy found dead in a mosque yard. It was revealed to be Johnny, Chuco's son, discovered after Chuco reported his disappearance. Soon after, the police reopened the case, and June felt guilty because her plan to provoke Griselda had unintended tragic consequences for a child. But there, June grew angrier at Griselda. Meanwhile, Carmen suddenly shows up. She came willingly and finally agreed to talk. The next day, Griselda was with Martha at the house, and they started using drugs again. They got carried away, and things got a bit out of control. But Martha took too many drugs and suddenly had a seizure, collapsing on the table and overdosing. Panicked, Griselda called Riviera over, who was shocked to find Martha dead. He warned Griselda that her future with the Ochoa cartel was now in jeopardy. He reminded her that the incident at Dario's birthday party had made things worse, and that Rafael and Ochoa wouldn't trust her anymore. Riviera also informed her that Carmen had gone to the police, leading to Griselda's accounts being frozen. Feeling unable to explain Martha's death to Ochoa, Griselda suggested they make it look like Martha ran away. They began packing, and Griselda called Riviera to Martha's room, where she found a stash of drugs hidden by Rafael. They planned to take Martha's belongings as money for their escape. While they were wrapping up Martha's body, Rafael suddenly arrived home, parking his car behind Riviera's. Griselda and Riviera moved Martha's body to the back of the house, while Rafael searched inside for her. After searching the house without finding Martha, Rafael didn't realize her body was in the pool. When they saw Rafael leave, Griselda and Riviera went back inside, packed up, and invited all of Griselda's children to come with them. Soon after, Dario called Griselda from the airport with Michael. He said goodbye, explaining he was tired of her and wanted to protect Michael from her bad influence. Griselda was heartbroken, but knew she had to leave immediately. Soon after, the group, along with Riviera, planned to escape to California. Meanwhile, Carmen continued her meeting with the police, but she only provided information about Griselda's drug business, not about Griselda's involvement in Martha's death. Despite June's desire to punish Griselda, Carmen hesitated to give any information about her. In the end, Rafael found Martha's body in the pool and became furious. He ordered his men to gather information from dealers across the west coast of America, believing Griselda would try to sell the goods they took from Martha's house. In the afternoon, the group arrived in California. However, they didn't have much money, so they decided to stay in a motel for the time being until Riviera could sell Rafael's belongings. Meanwhile, Griselda was still trying to convince Dario and Michael to join them in their escape. While Riviera went to find a buyer, Griselda's 3 children relaxed by playing on the beach. Griselda also called Dario's parents' house in Medellin, but Dario's mother said she had never met him and asked Griselda to stop calling. The next day, Riviera returned with money for Griselda. Soon after, Rafael found out that Griselda was in the Bahamas. A dealer reported seeing her in Los Angeles, so Rafael hurried there. In the afternoon, Riviera successfully sold more of their goods. Shortly after, a fellow dealer informed Riviera that Rafael had arrived in Los Angeles and was heading to a motel. Riviera was urged to leave quickly. Upon hearing this news, Riviera wanted to call Griselda, but she ran out of coins. So, she went to a nearby bank to exchange bills for change. However, the teller refused to serve her because Riviera wasn't a customer. Despite Riviera's attempts to persuade the teller, they wouldn't bend the rules. Realizing the urgency, Riviera resorted to showing her gun to get their attention. Finally, she managed to call the motel to convey the serious news. But Griselda already had a plan in mind. After the call, Griselda immediately instructed her children to have lunch and then follow Riviera to a designated place. Meanwhile, Rafael and his men were close to the motel, preparing to attack. However, when they arrived, they found the police waiting. Griselda had purposely surrendered herself to the police to avoid the Ochoa cartel's attacks. At that time, Griselda managed to avoid the massacre threat, but was caught by the police, much to Rafael's frustration. June, however, was still angry because Griselda was only charged with drug offenses, not murder. She wished for Griselda to receive the death penalty, but the punishment she faced was only 5 years. Meanwhile, Griselda was in a cell with her lawyer, requesting special protection during the trial to avoid cartel threats. Her children were also secured by lawyers. June was still determined to find ways to punish Griselda severely and also remembered Riviera. At the same time, Riviera and Griselda's children were in a small town in California. Riviera was about to leave for another transaction when news broke about a 10-year-old kidnapped during a bank robbery, with Riviera as a suspect according to CCTV footage. The following day, Griselda saw Riviera in a neighboring room, as the police had arrested her. Now, Riviera faces a tough decision. He could be free from the law if he reveals all the murder cases ordered by Griselda. Though he's loyal to her, he doesn't want to face the death penalty. Griselda is handed over to the Miami police for murder, leaving June satisfied that they finally caught her. Meanwhile, Riviera undergoes questioning at the district attorney's office, where he notices the prosecutor's young secretary. Using his hypnotic voice, Riviera calls the secretary from prison, spreading his dangerous influence. However, their phones were tapped, and they were threatened that their conversations would be made public. Eventually, the prosecutor decided to release Riviera as a key witness because his testimony was considered unreliable and could weaken the case. Thanks to Riviera's actions, Griselda managed to avoid further threats. The prosecutor also struck a deal with Griselda's lawyer, agreeing to a 7-year prison sentence for her. This left June feeling frustrated again because she felt Griselda deserved a harsher punishment. One day, there was a guest at Dario's parents' house in Medellin. Feeling suspicious, Dario checked the front room while the intruders, sent by Griselda, sneaked into the backyard. Their mission was to bring Michael home and kill Dario. Tragically, Dario was shot dead in front of his mother. With all her children gathered, Griselda asked them to patiently wait for her during her 7-year prison sentence. 7 years later, June resigned from her job as a field officer and handed over her gun to her superiors. Before leaving, she met Griselda, who was about to be released from prison. There, June delivered the heartbreaking news that Griselda's 3 children, Yuberio, Dixon, and Ozario, had been murdered. The police suspected the Ochoa cartel, but hadn't confirmed the killers. They purposely waited until Griselda's release to deliver the devastating news, intending to bring her to her lowest point. Now, only Michael, her youngest son, remained alive, and he was living with Dario's mother in Medellin. In the end, Griselda regained her freedom but found herself alone. She returned to her hometown of Medellin, but in 2012, tragedy struck when she was shot dead outside a butcher shop at the age of 69. The moral lesson from this film is don't mess with cartels, or you might end up in a sausage at the butcher's. Just kidding, but seriously, maybe stick to safer hobbies like knitting or gardening.